Good day to you, and how are you managing with all this snow this weekend and all the disruption that it's caused in your life? How are you managing? And what do I mean by that question? When I ask that question using the word managing, I'm basically talking about your decision making, aren't I? I'm talking about your decision making as it relates to trying to rearrange your life so that you can account for your classes being canceled, for not being able to go places during the snowstorm, for homework that might be assigned on email instead of in classes or on D2L. I'm talking about decision making. And so that's my lead-in for today's class. Even though we had a school delay, I'm doing a little bit on video here so that we can move right along in broadcast management. And management is effectively that as a definition. It's making effective decisions to harness resources, including people, to achieve organizational goals. That's what management is. And although this is a course in broadcast management, essentially we're going to be starting out with key components of management. Management as it applies to all industries, and later on we'll be focusing more on the broadcast dimension. And so the very first dimension that we're going to take a look at is actually leadership. And I'm going to cover the first 11 pages here by summarizing them of Chapter 1, which is on leadership. And we know that there have been a lot of leadership studies done over the period of time in academia to take a look at what makes a good leader. And in a confounding way, we still really don't know what makes a good leader. It's still very difficult to predict what makes a good leader. We know a good leader after the fact. We know when we see a person who's a good leader, a good coach on a team, a good president of the United States, a good captain. We know what makes a good leader when we look at a person and see their techniques, but as far as predicting what can make a good leader, that's more difficult. The early studies in leadership tended to focus on personality traits of a person, and those traits making a good leader or a bad leader. And the two most common traits that were looked at as being assets to good leadership were vision, which is the ability to project into the future and be creative and to see what the opportunities might be that you can reach if you get to that future. That's looking into the future. That's vision. And the second trait that has been looked at as being a strong suit of leadership is communication. Communication as a whole way of behaving. It involves listening, speaking, organizing, transmitting. It involves planning. It involves a lot of dimensions of the way that we speak using symbols and signs and other dimensions of language. So communication and vision were two very early traits looked at as far as what contributes to strong leadership. We know, though, that on the downside, one of the traits that has not contributed to good leadership is information hoarding. A person that hangs on to information is a person who's trying to strengthen their power base often, but it's not very good leadership. It causes suspicion. So if you have a boss, and that boss knows when the vacation days are going to be assigned, but the boss is not telling you what the vacation days are and whether you've got your vacation day yet, they're telling you to wait till the schedule comes out, they're hanging on to information. But that doesn't create goodwill on the part of the employees. They start to believe that the boss is manipulating them or the boss is holding something back, and so suspicion and doubt starts to set in. So information hoarding, while in a short-term way, can be very powerful for the person that's hoarding the information. In the long term, it does not prove to be very good in contributing to effective leadership. We also know that nonverbals are a very important part of leadership as well. A leader who comes off as being arrogant because of their body language and the way they walk is not going to be a person that is able to instill admiration in their leadership style. We also know that a person who crosses their arms when you're talking to them, giving off a defensive posture, is another example of a nonverbal that can accidentally communicate poor leadership skills. Leadership is somewhere in between those two kinds of nonverbals that I just cited. It's in between arrogance and it's in between defensiveness. It's communicating confidence, but also communicating being open to suggestions from other people. So nonverbals is another dimension of leadership that has been looked at over the years. We do know that two other kinds of behaviors which have been attributed to strong leadership include assertiveness. That means making sure that when you make a decision and also take action, that you have a certain confidence to it and that you don't let people push you back in a way that's going to cause you to doubt the direction that you've headed on with your decision. Assertiveness is not aggressiveness, but it's a kind of forceful way forward. We also know that decisiveness is another important dimension of leadership. A person who has a hard time making a decision is a person that's going to have their leadership style questioned. Even if your decision is wrong, to make a decision sometimes is the most important thing that can happen if you want to be considered to be a good leader. Something else that is considered to be a strong suit if you are a leader is conflict management. There will be conflict in all facets of life. People are people, and sometimes they don't get along. Sometimes they have a problem with something that you've decided, and they're going to challenge you on it. They're going to challenge you in a direct way, or they're going to challenge you in a way that maybe revolve around gossiping about you or spreading rumors in a way that tries to dilute your leadership. Well, conflict management is the ability to resolve those situations with not getting down into the trenches and becoming part of the conflict itself. We'll study conflict management more in this course, but it's certainly a strong leadership attribute. Now the book goes into different theories of leadership, and over the years, these theories have grown out of the fields of psychology and sociology, and there are three major ones. There's Theory X. Theory X takes place in organizations that need to take a hard line, either because they fear that if there's a problem with the communication in the organization, then the authority will be questioned and the organization will not function. So Theory X is a very authoritarian type of leadership style. It's top-down management, if you like. The boss makes a decision, pass it on down to a supervisor. The supervisor lets the employees know, and there's no questioning of what's going on. There's very little input on the decision-making itself. It's just a decision that's been made by a person in a position of superiority because that person and the organization believes that's the structure that needs to be. If you look at NFL games, for example, oftentimes you have teams where the head coach makes a decision on a play, or whether a player should be playing on a play, and those plays can't be questioned. That's an authoritarian style of leadership. Of all the organizations, the military is seen as the organization that uses authoritarian management styles the most, or Theory X management styles, because you can't have a second guessing of battlefield strategy in the middle of the battlefield, in the middle of a battlefield warfare. In the middle of warfare on the battlefield. All right, next up is Theory Y. Theory Y is a complete swing to the opposite side. It's a different kind of leadership. It's known as humanistic leadership. It's where you bring employees together and try and get them to contribute to the participation of the decision-making. I would say that this is the kind of management that most closely characterizes WESS Radio, because it is an organization that relies heavily on volunteers. If you have a person who's volunteering to be the music director, there's nothing really that you can hold over them from a Theory X standpoint to force them to do the job. You rely on their willingness to do the job. And so that job, as well as the other jobs at the radio station, are positions that are contributing to the decision-making. And typically staff meetings are where people are sitting around and everybody is given a chance to offer their input. That's a very Theory Y leadership approach. Theory Z realized that the Theory Y is kind of weak and Theory X is too heavy-handed. So Theory Z tries to combine authoritarian management with humanistic management. And it involves a scenario where employees or workers or contributors to an organization are allowed to have input in the decision, but the final decision, rather than being a majority vote, for example, is undertaken by a single person. That's where the authoritarianism comes in, but it's also blending in humanism into the theory of management. Now, in addition to those broad theories, there are very individual leadership styles, and I'll ask you to read about those on your own in the book, and perhaps this is what you'll be relating to your RSC posts. But you've got a situational leadership style, which, as it suggests, depends on the situation, and that's what you adapt to. You don't bring a leadership style to the situation. You let the situation dictate your leadership style. And then secondly, you have a contingency leadership style. And contingency leadership styles says that you make plans in essence, but if things go wrong or if things change, then you've got to adapt. That's a contingency leadership style. Then you've got a path goal leadership style that tries to identify a goal and then how are you going to get there. ESU in large part has this kind of leadership style when it identifies as part of its mission statement to provide accessible education to our students, then perhaps you can see why today's announcement is that out-of-state students for ESU next year will be paying a 50% less tuition cost That's huge for ESU. And it does speak to this providing accessibility to education, because it's saying that out-of-state students were not able to afford ESU and therefore didn't have access to the system. That is a path-goal leadership approach. Finally, we have task relationship as the fourth kind of individual leadership style. And it has to do with trying to frame what needs to be done within an organization based on a task rather than a personality. If the task is to create more parking at ESU, then the problem is not about the police, the problem is not about faculty taking spots, the problem is not about students parking illegally, it's simply about expanding parking. It's a task relationship style of leadership. So there's some background information to start our discussion on leadership because of this snowstorm information. Today you have your Rounding Some Corners posts, which were due by 12 o'clock. Hopefully you made those in time. And then on Wednesday, there is going to be a follow-up response post to the Rounding Some Corners post. I'm going to detail the crux of what that assignment is all about in an email, so please look out for that email. And otherwise, have a great day.